Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing JSA Oban using the dreaded double O-Yoroi list versus Corregidor Space Force, and the scenario is that fantastic hot mess crossing lines. Now, two things about this battle report before we get into the lists. The first is big thanks to channel supporter D-Parrot, who made the request for JSA Oban, but in particular the double O-Yoroi list to be featured. Apparently we discussed it in the all factions tier list with Jordan. I have no memory of that whatsoever, but that's because that video was hours long, and God help me try and remember anything but the high points, but apparently it struck a chord enough to make a battle report request featuring it. Now, the second thing is that even though this game will in some respects be quite silly, I'm playing JSA O-Yoroi with backup O-Yoroi as Lieutenant Decoy, and this is just a casual games night at the club game played with a mate, we're going to dial in on the decision-making process, in particular at the end of the second player's second round, because it serves as a very interesting case study in a particular kind of decision-making that you will often have to make in Infinity. Specifically, the player in that circumstance, in the final orders of the turn, is going to be faced with a decision that presents them with good and bad options, and especially multiple possible outcomes that individually could be considered quite a good result of an individual face-to-face roll, but which we're going to look at in the moment through the prism of, does this decision win me the game? Because something that can be very easy to do in Infinity is see the red mist, get locked into scoring unit kills or scoring unit disables or figuring out the best way to shut down a piece that has been causing you grief, and take a face-to-face roll that gives you the best odds of success in the moment, but which does not necessarily win the game. And so we're going to pause at the end of the second round and talk through a very specific decision and use it as an example of how to do a little bit of longer-term thinking in Infinity, and as a consequence, the two different ways this game could end. But first, let's get into the lists. So this is my attempt at a JSA Oban double O-Yoroi list. O-Yoroi are very serviceable tags. They are effectively full main battle tags, with the only real downside being that they're armor 7 rather than armor 8, but in every other respect they are a full main battle tag chassis. They have ballistic skill 14, tactical awareness, 3 structure, and a multi-HMG and a heavy flamethrower. And to make them justify the 78 points that they cost, which is affordable to take 2 of, if not easy, they've got two notable advantages. The first is that they have access to mine layers, so mine layer and the Crazy Koala deployable weapon. Crazy Koalas are a very nice deployable weapon. They can be used quite effectively as part of an offensive attack as well as just defensively, and mine layer can be quite pleasant as a defensive tool. It's not going to matter this game because I'll be going first. But if you were going second with this list and trying to defend, well, having 2 mine layers with Crazy Koalas is totally fine. Now, the other more significant and major selling point of the O-Yoroi is that they have stealth and martial arts and are genuinely good close combatants. CC-23, martial arts 2, and a very, very powerful explosive close combat weapon makes them very capable of putting basically anything down in a fight that isn't a more expert melee trooper than they are, and frankly, they can brute force their way through some engagements if they need to. I wouldn't want to fight a Hatamoto Imperial Guard with one, but anything short of that, you can at least roll the dice. The other interesting thing that they do when combined with the O-Yoroi Pilot is that O-Yoroi already are quite good at dodging. They dodge natively on 13s, which I think might be the highest of any tag, and with an O-Yoroi Pilot, they dodge on 16s. Now, that's just one of the best dodge attributes in the entire game. There's only a very small number of pieces that meet or exceed that, and having that on a tag is generally kind of unheard of. And that opens up an occasional and interesting defensive layer that will fail me multiple times this game, but also matter on at least one occasion, which is interesting and useful and a niche that they have. Now, once you've taken 2 O-Yoroi, you are very committed, and so the rest of this list effectively exists just to support and fill out the order pool and make sure they can move around the field. Although, there are some pieces, especially in Combat Group 2, that can roll up their sleeves and get work done themselves. So the remainder of Combat Group 1, we have the O-Yoroi Pilot, we have a 4-person Keisotsu team, with the Keisotsu with Ballistic Skill Attack -3 and Thunderbolt, the Keisotsu Hacker, a Kenpai Chain of Command, and then a 9-point Keisotsu just to get the fire team bonus up a little higher because Keisotsu themselves don't have natively good ballistic skill. These are all very efficiently costed pieces. The Keisotsu Hacker is very hard to put down. They're all very cheap. That Thunderbolt is only 12 points and is a gun with base attack -3, and then the AP rifle is 9 points, 9 points. The Pangolin, we've got 2 of those with deactivators, repeaters, etc. The main reason there is because of the baggage. Now, I'm not actually going to reload much this game as it will happen, but this list can reload a lot if it wants to, because we've got the 2 Mine Layer O-Yoroi, and then we've got 2 models with Disco Balls in Combat Group 2. We've then got a Sasha in Combat Group 1. I will convert her order regular some of the time, and if I can't, in crossing lines, she deploys quite close to my opponent's deployment zone, and she'll just throw some Specfire EM grenades. Combat Group 2 is built. The idea with Combat Group 2 was just lay down visibility control to let the O-Yoroi advance, but since we will be playing crossing lines, we'd actually have some opportunity to use these as our forward pieces to draw attention and potentially get some kills. 2 Yan-Yans, very cheap high-fizz smoke grenades, and they can trade out with other pieces in crossing lines, a Flash Pulse remote for a regular order, and then 2 Tenkos. Tenkos both have disco balls, and Blitzens and light shotguns and CC weapons and OK close combat, etc. They're there in this list for the disco ball, because I'm looking to have the opportunity to get the O-Yoroi into close combat. But as it happens, we'll actually see these Tenko perform. One of them in particular will be one of the men of the match. Now, the obvious weakness of this list is that it's built around 2 tactical armored gears. It is not particularly flexible. If I wasn't playing a scenario like crossing lines that is mostly about violence, it has no classifiers, it has 2 objectives that you can try and accomplish with a specialist, you just need to do so by the end of the game. If not for that scenario, I would be less likely to contemplate this, but hey, it was a fun and interesting request. I don't normally like requests that commit more than half of my entire army into models and therefore don't allow for any actual list building flexibility, but at least theoretically there's nothing in the game that the O-Yoroi can't at least try to fight, so it's not quite in the same realm as please take 2 Boktar, PS Boktar can't kill certain things in the game. I enjoyed the Boktar battle report challenge, but I had to wait a lot longer to get to it before I could find a circumstance where I could use it, as opposed to double O-Yoroi, which you can force double tag in some scenarios, and crossing lines is one of them. Now, playing against me today would be Space Force Jurisdictional Command of Corregidor. We've actually seen something interesting emerge where, on release of Mazebreaker, it kind of just looked like Ground Division was probably better, and then a bunch of people just kept playing Space Force, and it turns out that Space Force also got some buffs, and it's still pretty good. Now, does it have a Bearcat? No, and Bearcats are one of the most powerful and effective models in the game. But there's still plenty that's going on in Space Force that's effective, and one of the small advantages that Space Force has is that people will have established collections and established practice that allow them to just kind of keep playing it, while in this case, my opponent Tony is going to be working on getting his Mazebreaker models painted up so he can play them. His whole army is painted and it looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, this is a list with just the hidden, well, technically speaking, I have left 1 nominally hidden information piece visible, but it's always quite obvious what a single mimetism -3 camouflage marker in a Nomad Corregidor deployment zone is, so I have left the intruder up just because it is obvious that that's an intruder. But we can see from this list that there is something hidden and waiting to turn up. Now, it's Space Force Corregidor, that's going to mean a drop troop of some description, and you can probably make some relatively educated guesses about what half an SWC and 22 points buys you in Space Force. But for the sake of it, at this stage, we don't have absolute confirmation. Now, what we do see is Combat Group 1 consisting of McMurrah, who is excellent, a 3-person fire team of an Evader Specialist Operative with AP Spitfire and a Tinbot, Lupe Balboa with Emitter, Panzerfaust, smoke grenades, AP submachine gun, etc. She's changed with Mazebreaker, and to be honest, she's a very interesting profile. Like the deployable weapons, that's interesting, but chain of command and linked smoke grenades with wildcard keywords is like, yeah, I could pay 23 points for that. And then we have a Daktari forming out the Harris. I don't believe the Daktari counts as anything, but the Evader and Lupe should both have the Corregidor keyword, and so get 2-person duo bonuses. We then have another 3-person fire team of a Wildcat, the Mobile Brigada, Lieutenant, and Jazz. We've also got some fire team keywords shared here with, I believe it's the Wildcat and the Mobile Brigada that will share the same keyword, so 3-person Harris, 3-person core. Now, the Wildcat in particular, my opponent for today, Tony, is Wildcats are his absolute vanity unit. We have slowly been getting him to stop taking full 5-person fire teams of them, getting him back down to a sensible and reasonable number, and 21 points for the Wildcat Heavy Rocket Launcher is perfectly reasonable if you have the SWC. It's an MSV ARO piece, and those are just useful to have sometimes. In this game, for example, I've got 2 models with disco, but I've also got 2 models with regular smoke, and the Wildcat will help keep those at bay. Now, what really makes this fire team cool is that you take the Mobile Brigada Lieutenant, cool, that's your Lieutenant sorted. Gone are the days of the SWC tax on Corregidor Lieutenants, but the Brigada is still a good LT. It's just a useful model late in the game. It can spend the LT order itself, and it lets you staple Jazz to a Tinbot -6, which makes her tremendously difficult to kill with anything resembling a even a remotely competent killer hacker struggles to get through a Tinbot Firewall -6 and her native hacking ability, etc. You can force the issue with some really powerful hackers, but even they can stall out if they don't get a little bit lucky. Those kind of defenses let you run Jazz as the one hacker in the list, or at least the one hacker we can see for now, enough to make your Masai Morans live, but not an overweening investment. So then 2 Jaguars, 1 adhesive launcher rifle Panzerfaust, 1 chain rifle, both with smoke grenades. Combat Group 2, we have the Mimetism 3 camouflage marker in the Nomad deployment zone. It's an intruder. It's a multi-sniper intruder. That is the intruder profile that you take these days. It's just outstanding with +1 special dice. And this game would be no different. 2 Masai Morans, and then 2 Jaguars. Now, the Masai Morans are an interesting thing to note, because you might make the argument that, hey, Crossing Lines has these exclusion zones. Are these infiltrators still good? Yes, you fools, you absolute rubes, because Masai Moran are still built perfectly for midfield infiltration duties. That's their job, they're very well spec'd for it, and so you just use them as pieces that can deploy in the forward deployment zones, where they do their job completely ably and cause me a huge amount of grief. Now, the difference in Crossing Lines is that things that wouldn't normally be able to go there also can, so they tend to be very wide value proposition arrays. Lots more models can be really good in Crossing Lines, but models that would already be good because they're well suited to being infiltrators and happen to be infiltrators are still quite good in Crossing Lines much of the time. And so at 15 points apiece, Masai Moran still very serviceable in that role. So in this particular case, Tony is going to win the lieutenant role, and he's going to elect to set up second on this side of the board over here, on the left side of the table from this perspective, and so I'm going to choose to go first. Crossing Lines is one that I never really decided, or at least coming back to the scenario after a while away from it, I'm not 100% on whether I prefer to go first or second. The scoring in second can be quite advantageous. Going first tends to give you a lot more table space to play with. One thing that I did have the sense to remember, and definitely found to be true in this game, is that if you're going first in Crossing Lines, you can really take advantage of the forward deployment zones, and if you're going second, you should be very judicious, because pieces that you put in that forward space are very exposed to opposing fire from both directions, from the things that deploy in your opponent's forward space and from the things in your opponent's deployment zone, and so you want to be very judicious. And one of the mistakes that Tony's going to make this game is during deployment, and it's the mistake that people make the first, second, third time they play Crossing Lines, thinking they should take advantage of that zone even if they're going second when perhaps they should not. So I am going to aggressively push into the forward zone. We're going to have both Yarn Yarns, a Tanko, and a Baggage Bot, and the Sasha deployed in the forward area. The first Yarn Yarn will deploy inside this building, a Tanko and the Baggage Bot will deploy up here. The Baggage Bot is a repeater. I make myself relatively comfortable that it can't be seen from these rooftops. The rampart it's behind is tall enough, so it's reasonably safe to put it there. My opponent could deploy something a little bit on this sort of top of the rooftop here, but I'll have the first chance to go after it. So at worst, I consider that to be a reasonable bait. The Sasha is deployed on this rooftop here as far forward towards the opposing deployment zone as she can, and that would be because if I don't convert her irregular order regular, she's going to throw EM grenades. She's going to throw those EM grenades into my opponent's deployment zone, so I want her aggressively positioned forward. And the second Yarn Yarn is deployed here on this rooftop. The Yarn Yarns will roll up an MSV on the one inside the garage and +4 armor on the one on the rooftop, which is fantastic. Neither of those will matter the entire game, but they're quite good rolls. Now, I will spend a command token to reserve both of my O-Yoroi, but they will deploy. One will deploy here. Yes, I know that looks like a motorcycle, but it is Silhouette 7, and it's the best thing I've got to be a second Silhouette 7 tag. One will deploy between these garden beds here, and my Lieutenant one will deploy behind this building in my deployment zone, which we'll get to when we talk about these Jaguars. Otherwise, the second Tenko is deployed in my DZ behind this car, and then the Kasotsu fire team is scattered in and around this rooftop, with the Thunderbolt hidden behind a sign but ready to step out and take some fires if he needs to. Now, for Tony's deployment zone, he's going to reserve drop McMurrah, but the other pertinent elements are that we have Jaguars scattered around. Importantly, what is going to be a little bit of a trap for Tony is these two Jaguars here. Now, they look like they're safe, but I have 168 points of reserve drops. This is objectively a mistake. These two Jaguars here are going to be food for the tags, even though when they deployed, they looked safe. That's a mistake. It's something that Tony can do differently next game. Masai Moran is going to deploy down here. It'll be nooked in behind this air conditioning unit here. Reasonably safe unless something gets quite close to it. And then the Crazy Koala is forced onto this rooftop. This is one advantage to deploying first, and one of the issues of deploying, especially things like Crazy Koala mine layers in this scenario, is that your two forward deployment zones are pushed very close together. And mine layer, what Tony found was that his Crazy Koalas from the Masai Morans were just pushed into positions where they couldn't target anything because that's the legal requirement of mine layer deployments. Getting your models down first can edge out your opponent's mine layer pieces. For that reason, we see the second Crazy Koala on this rooftop up here because the Masai Moran is at ground level hanging out behind a sign. Now, in the deployment zone, the intruder is going to be on this rooftop next to a Jaguar that is in a duo, so we can have fire off of this rooftop. The Jazz, Wildcat, and Mobile Brigada fire team is in and around this building, with Jazz and the Wildcat behind this wall here, with the Wildcat looking out in this direction, and the Mobile Brigada on the rooftop. He is standing with his multi-rifle pointed in this direction, but he'll be probably willing to take cover if something actually engages him. On this rooftop over here, we have the Evader fire team. So the Evader itself, the Daktari, and then Lupe Balboa, who will be relatively passive in the early game, but have a very significant effect in the late game. So with all of these pieces deployed, yep, I slam down the first tag over here because it's pretty much a free kill on these Jaguars. I can get them out of cover, very bad for Tony. And then the other one comes here because I have a particular plan. Now, Tony cottons on to the fact that there's probably something I've got in mind with this piece, and so McMurray actually comes here. Now, there's a bunch of cars in this building here, in this garage. I've got my Yan Yan, one of my Yan Yans is in this space, and so McMurray kind of deploys Boulder's Brass watching this tag, just hoping to absorb its attention. That's a little bit of a risk, but he is deployed quite close to the tag, which means I'm not going to be engaging on 17s. I'll be engaging on 14s at best at that distance with the HMG range bands, and so it's a bit of a calculated risk that won't be punished. Now, this is going to be a violent first turn for me, but not one that is going to end the game immediately. In fact, the game will stay live for some time, as we'll talk through. But we are going to get a bunch of kills, and those will start. No impetuous activations, everything is far too pinned in. We're going to start with the Lieutenant tag that will spend its order, one regular order, and the LT order, getting kills on both of these Jaguars. It will move up and around to do so, it'll get some other stuff, it'll actually end up in this nook here behind this sign, but the important thing is that it gets these two kills, which is a very big deal. Two regular orders out of the pool, basically for free, firing shock rounds at the Dogger Jaguars. They're firing back under terrible circumstances. Just nice, clean face-to-face rolls, and down they both go. And that leads me into the second significant thing that I had planned for this turn, which is that this other O-Yoroi, who has its own tactical awareness orders, it's going for a walk. There is a line up the back of the table edge along here that is wide enough to accommodate a tag, and so that is the journey that it's going to take, and it's what Tony didn't quite expect. Yes, there's a face-to-face roll in the first instance versus McMurray. McMurray crits his smoke grenade, and I just have to keep on walking. That's fine, I do take the shot. It would have been worth it if I'd gotten the kill, but I didn't, and so we just keep moving this direction. Now, we do move through the intruder's line of sight at some point, but Tony is not sure. Like, each time I move to see the intruder, that is the only thing that the O-Yoroi would see, and he's not quite willing to reveal it. I think there's an argument that he potentially should have as I crossed this gap, but he didn't. He was willing to keep it concealed under camouflage, and that would pay off, but it would also come as a cost, because as the O-Yoroi pushes up and around, from this point here, it engages the Brigada, suppresses the Brigada. Now, the Brigada does have courage. It could have stayed standing, but it is Tony's lieutenant, and although he has chain of command, not necessarily willing to have your chain of command trigger so early in the game. So the Brigada takes a face-to-face roll, holds the O-Yoroi off. I think it takes a wound, and it's like, yep, okay, cool, we out, and it drops. That lets the O-Yoroi continue on over here, pauses to see if the intruder wants to reveal itself. It does not, and so cool, it gets settled in, and then around the corner it comes and looks down this way here. And what it sees is Jazz and the Wildcat, neither of them are in cover. Now, that's a short-range engagement, but it's still an engagement that's going to go all my way, and after a couple of back-and-forth gunfights, both of them are dead, and I pull back around. The only sort of position that I can end and still be in the dead zone here, which is how you score points, I make the decision to end the O-Yoroi's turn, because I basically used all of my orders to do this. We end the O-Yoroi's turn here. Now, that is in a position where it can be engaged by the intruder, but as a reminder, I do dodge on 16s, and I can potentially take that fight once or twice, and if I need to, if I think it's too risky, I can leave the dead zone by dodging into the deployment zone. So I consider that to be a risk that is reasonably worth taking, but it is a risk that I am taking. Potentially I should not have. Now, that's already a very effective and violent turn, but I've not used any of the orders in my combat group 2. I haven't done that yet, because I couldn't really advance with things like the Tankos until the Masai Morans that are pinning back each of them had their repeaters effectively turned off by the death of Jazz, but with Jazz dead, we can make a move. And so this Tanko runs up here, stabs this Masai Moran to death, and then runs back and around. And so that is a 5 troopers killed on the first turn. All of them regular, all of them relatively important, Jazz in particular. And ending this turn going into scoring effectively, waiting to see what my opponent will do, but what I'm done positioned to score, I have almost 100 points in this dead zone, and I have almost 80 points in this dead zone. That, as far as I can tell, is a pretty solid turn 1 in crossing lines, and it's going to be answered by a pretty damn effective counterattack. So Tony is down 5 orders going into his first turn, but he's got plays to make. McMurray is going to impetuous into, engage and destroy the Yan Yan. He'll be wounded doing so. So that's 1 kill in response, and then a linked Jaguar over here is going to throw smoke. Yep, out comes the intruder, draws line of sight to this O-Yoroi, takes the shot, surprise attack through smoke. I don't try and shoot back. I'd be shooting back at that range on 5s, whereas I'm dodging on 13s. I'll take the dodge on 13s, +3 from TagCom, -3 from surprise attack, but I fail the dodge, and the intruder firing its multi-sniper puts the O-Yoroi all the way to unconscious. What are the odds of an intruder sniper dealing 3 wounds in 1 order to a main battle tag? They're not high. But they also aren't 0, and he manages to do it. 1 order and the tag is down. I don't even get a chance to guts back around the corner. Just boom, all the way out. My opponent's intruder is named Dante, and so Dante has done it again and secured himself a kill worth almost twice his points cost. Now, that's not where my opponent's turn is going to end, because although you'd think setting all of that up, getting that kill, etc., well, surely there's not much he can do about this tag. Nope, there absolutely is. In lands the hidden information piece in the form of a Hellcat hacker. It sticks the landing, unsurprising, needing a 15, and it's going to crawl up and around here until it can get in zone of control of the tag. Now, he's going to try, he does this cleverly, right? He does not have that many orders to play with, and so what he's going to do is, while he has the orders that might make this useful and to spend, hey, by the way, he would have liked to have walked onto the table sort of around here, but he's unable to do so because there's a crazy koala edging him out. That's one of the things that I spent my last order on with the O-Yoroi. So he's going to go for total control while he has the opportunity to do something useful. But as soon as he gets to his last order, maybe his second last, he changes tack and goes, that's fine, we're just going to Oblivion you instead, because that model has spent the lieutenant order, I know it is the lieutenant. And that one succeeds, and then the hacker just hunkers down inside zone of control. And so yeah, okay, that's a heck of a turn. After what I thought was a very, very good turn 1, I'm now facing 1 dead tag. My opponent dominates his dead zone. Yes, I dominate mine, but my other main battle tag is now Oblivioned and in zone of control of a hacker. So, cool, yep, excellent work. The score sits at 1-1. Now, I have speedballed, and so I do have recovery options. And we're going to call the speedball in. We're actually just going to land like both of them basically in and around this space. And it turns out that this one over here is going to land as an auto repair kit, and then the switch on does indeed land. So the O-Yoroi is going to use stealth, it's going to use its tactical awareness order, it's going to swing around this way, it's going to get out of zone of control of the hacker, and then move again and switch itself back on so that it can go for a little bit of an adventure. From there, it's going to come up and around this way. It's going to actually pause before it goes that far because we need to deal with this intruder. And we're going to deal with this intruder in a way that's a little bit jank, but worth spending the order on to see if I get it. I've used a lot of my command tokens at this point, and I need to make sure I keep some in the bank because I don't want my tag to get possessed and not be recoverable. That means I need to productively spend my irregular orders, and that means that it's Sasha time. Now, this intruder over here is in camouflage. I can't target it with a spec fire, but I can target the Jaguar that's standing next to it. And so she actually did this on the first turn and missed, totally fine. She'll just throw a spec fire again, will the Sasha. She's in bad range, but she's got good fizz, and she rolls the crit. And I dare say my opponent feels a little hard done by that, as both the Jaguar and the Intruder are rendered isolated. More importantly, the Intruder is revealed and fails his guts roll, and because of how close to him the grenade is, he can't leave the danger area, which means his only option on a failed guts roll is to go prone. So 6-point Sasha has made the Intruder sit down. Now, one of the things that is relevant here, and will be relevant in a future turn as well, is just the importance of isolated is a very deleterious state, but it's not dead, and that intruder is going to stay in the game. It's going to be able to spend its irregular order next turn to stand up and be annoying, and force me to deal with it, and there will be similar things happening on my side of the field. I recovered my O-Yoroi that got isolated. So isolated is a very powerful state, and I've had a powerful effect here, but the most important thing is actually the failed guts roll. Because it's the failed guts roll that lets the O-Yoroi continue this journey, draw a bead on McMurray and put him all the way to dead, and then get in and around and occupy this position here. That position is just barely in the dead zone. That will be worth points, and so I want to stay ahead on those points. I'm able to just spend a few extra orders as part of all of this movement, getting my robot dispensed out of the tag and also activating this console. You do want to do that over the course of these games if you can. And indeed, the decision to do so would have a significant effect on the field. Now, in and around that, I also have my Tanko activating, and they accomplish a couple of things. This tanker on this rooftop up here is able to jaunt down through a doorway, engage, and destroy the Masai Moran on ground level. He's going to do that after his friend does things, though, because we also have to deal with this Hellcat, because this Hellcat has rendered the Masai Moran repeater areas live again. So this tanker is going to end up coming up and around through a doorway across the rooftop and into close combat with the Hellcat, and this won't be a perfect engagement. I get into close combat with the Hellcat, I stab it passes its save, pause, let this Tanko move in and get the kill, come back to this Tanko and spend all the remaining orders that I have in that group, and I'm not able to actually put the Hellcat down. That is a problem that Tankos can have from time to time, where all they have are shock and monofilament CCWs, and shock is just better in this particular case. And it's never actually fantastic to be relying on a shock CCW in close combat. They have good CC, they have martial arts, but yeah, a bit naff, but this Tanko has been done plenty of work already, and he will eventually get that kill. So, is this a solid turn? It's okay, but I can kind of feel myself, we're on that kind of edge. Because what I haven't done is establish significant control over my opponent's dead zone. Right? This space, there's nothing in it. I've got plenty of models in the forward deployment zone, but just in the forward deployment zone, and that's not something that you score. We are controlling our dead zone, but as the first player, you need to do more than that. In crossing lines, you often need to establish kind of a decisive advantage. Now, my attritional advantage is strong, but it's not enough to completely pin my opponent back, and in fact he still has a fully mobile fire team Haris, and he can consolidate down some orders to make use of it. One of the big challenges that I'm having is that the tags are having to spend lots of orders maneuvering because they're my only mobile element. There's actually a really interesting thing that's happening, which we will see over the course of this game, where one Tanko, the one that so far has engaged the Hellcat and killed the Masai Moran, that's going to do as much work as any of the tags, and the reason why is that it's in a position, it just happens by virtue of its board position, to be able to do so. Board position is often one of the most important assets a model can have, and when you have a very powerful, mobile, but very powerful model, it often has to invest orders to gain board position that might otherwise be achieved by having a more diverse range of units, each of which could accomplish something with orders spent on it. That's one of the reasons why when I'm building lists, what I actually prefer to have is as close as possible to 15 troopers who could all meaningfully progress the game state rather than like 2 superheroes and a bunch of cheerleaders. Just a little bit of food for thought when thinking about lists like the double O-Yoroi list. Now, despite that, we go into Tony's second turn, and yes, the attrition advantage in my favor, even with the intruder having aced the first O-Yoroi, is significant. But Tony hunkers down, consolidates combat groups as best he can, and sorts out a plan. And one of the things that I don't have at this point is a really significant ARO presence. I've got some mad traps that are pinning back this fire team a little bit, but only a little bit, and there are durable elements in this fire team. And so we sort of talk through what might he do, and there's a line that he's going to pursue. So this fire team is going to move out. They have to be quite order efficient. That's going to involve some dodges that will succeed, and occasionally just having to tank a mad trap shot. But these guys, so Crazy Queller, they're going to move out and around here. They're going to leave the Daktari behind in... She'll appear in this position, but it looks like somewhere around here behind this wall, while the other 2 members move forward. She has to stay behind because there needs to be something in the dead zone to score points, and there's nothing else in a position to move forward easily. That's going to get Lupe Balboa and the Evader into this position here in time to engage this tag. Now, this is the only time in the game that the tag's dodging ability is going to matter, because these people are moving through line of fire of the tag's peripheral. Now, I think I actually played this illegally as I'm playing it out, which is kind of fascinating because what I did was I declared it's either warning or alert, whichever the skill is that lets another model declare dodge despite not having line of fire. I declared that with the peripheral, but I think I can't dodge with the tag if the peripheral declares warning because the tag has to declare the same skill as the peripheral. So, a perfect game of Infinity has never been played, and I'm pretty sure I cheated. Although there might have been a way around that with some other arrows if I thought about it. Not enormously important to the actual case study here, which is eventually we do get the tag to face in this direction once I recognize the threat that's coming for it, but the Evader and Lupe Balboa make it to this bridge here. The Tanko is going to fail all of its dodges to leave melee and try and engage them, and so we have 2 orders to engage the tag. It's inside 24 inches, it's good range for everyone's guns, the tag is out of cover. Now, the first face-to-face roll is going to be the Evader versus the tag. It's going to spool up the AP Spitfire, 5 dice on 16s versus 1 dice on 14s. I miss my shot. He hits a bunch of times. So kind of interesting, actually, wouldn't have impacted the game at all because I whiffed my shot. So the fact that I think I may have cheated declaring warning didn't actually matter at all. That's good to know. But a bunch of hits land into the tag, passes quite a lot of his saves. The tag eventually fails 1 armor roll from that volley, and so it's wounded, but it still has 2 structure left, and it changes its facing, I guess, is how the actual timeline would go. At that point, Tony has 1 order left in the turn. And this is where we get into the what is the decision that wins me the game? Now, we're just kind of playing relatively fast and loose. This is just a casual game on a game night evening. No tremendously big deal, but let's imagine at this point that the trousers of time bifurcate, because there are 2 choices that Tony has. The first is to engage with the Evader, try and deal wounds with the Spitfire. If he fails, the tag is alive and fully functional. There is also theoretically a model with a gizmo kit back here that could recover the tag if the tag gets put to unconscious but not to dead. Alternatively, he can choose to engage with Lupe Balboa. Lupe Balboa has mimetism and an emitter and is in a fire team, which gives her an overwhelmingly better chance, not overwhelmingly, but a better, certainly a much better chance of winning the face-to-face roll and accomplishing what she wants to accomplish if she fires, which is to isolate and immobilize the tag. So we have, on one hand, a lethal engagement that could kill my tag, but has a lower chance of success, and a non-lethal engagement, which cannot by definition kill my tag, but has a higher chance of success and does represent a mobility kill. We've seen in this particular turn, Tony's intruder is going to just stand up and walk out and be annoying for me for the final turn. We have a case study right there in how isolated is not the same as dead. And so he has to make this choice. What is the choice that you would have made in that circumstance? He elects to fire with the emitter. I fail my shot again. He inflicts a bunch of saves. I fail all of them, but 1 is all that matters, and the tag is isolated and immobilized. However, that was the wrong choice. And it was the wrong choice specifically through that decision-making prism we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, which was, will this decision win me the game? Now, much of the time you can't answer that question in an individual tactical decision. How a unit chooses to engage, what a unit chooses to engage with. Often our choices are not so obvious as that, and it's many cumulative things that produce a game win. But if you're not sure, if there's if there's a choice like this where you have two clear options, and you're trying to figure out which to choose. Often hacking AROs will be given this option where you have the, do I want to declare total control or do I want to declare oblivion? And sometimes there is an answer. Which of these will win me the game and which of these will not? And in this particular case, if Tony had chosen to engage with the AP Spitfire, then he would probably have won the game. And the reason why is that he had quite a lot of points sitting on this bridge in the dead zone, but not as many points as this tag. Had he killed the tag or even rendered it unconscious, he would have scored 2 points this round, and I would have scored none. Instead, he scored his dead zone, I scored mine, and the score remained at 1-all, but with this objective under my control. Now, I actually kind of cottoned that as we were doing scoring, and I said, "Oh, do you want to just go back and like play through that differently? We know how the dice rolled. Just roll your hits on the intruders. We know that I failed every single saving throw. I rolled like 18, 18, 19, 19. Do you want to just sort of like try and see?" And he's like, "No, no, no. We'll play it as it lies. Like that's interesting." But he had, absolutely no interest in going back and rewinding. But for the purpose of an educational experience, it's very worth when you've got that tricky decision and you're like, E-Meta or AP Spitfire? Some of the time, actually, a mobility kill on a tag is all you need. Take the higher option. But sometimes you have this use case where you go, there is a lower outcome of success on one of these rolls, but that roll is the one that wins me the game because isolated is not dead, dead is dead, dead is not points in zones, and that in this case would have swung this game. Now, we can see here the tag isolated, immobilized, and wounded. He's going to attempt to spend both of his orders trying to roll a 1 because I have no further way to get him out of isolated, immobilized states. He fails both. That's fine. It's not the end of the world. This is going to be the last picture of the game because from here things are going to be relatively simple. Firstly, this tanko down here, the one that is still engaged with the Hellcat, is going to murder everything in this space. He's just going to win face-to-face roll after face-to-face roll. He's going to cut down the Hellcat, cut down Lupo Balboa, and cut down the Evader, all in short order. Good work, lad. You are now officially the highest performing model on the entire table, significantly outperforming either of the O-Yoroi, at least in terms of models and points killed. We're then going to have the Kaisotsu spool up and take some engagements, the important thing being that after a couple of face-to-face rolls, the Kaisotsu puts down the Intruder, coming very close to justifying the points cost of the entire fire team in doing so. But that is going to take basically all of the orders that I have. There have been too many casualties, too many other things fallen apart. We're not quite going to accomplish very much. This tanko actually had to move into Combat Group 1 to accomplish these kills because there aren't enough orders in Combat Group 2. And so we will move out with this team, but we'll mostly just move out to lock down this zone. We can't really get anything into my opponent's far zone. That's about it. That's as far as we go with this particular turn. But if you've been keeping track of models on my opponent's side of the field, you will know that he is thoroughly in retreat. There is a last-ditch effort to get this Daktari up and around to here to press this button, but there really just aren't enough command tokens left, and even if she'd made it, we did roll the dice out, and the Daktari did not succeed on the Willpower 13 roll necessary to flip this button. Had she been in position to get there, and she'd succeeded, actually, yeah, that would have flipped the game, but the more decisive points in this particular case would have been scored at the end of round 2 if that O-Yoroi had been killed. So overall, definitely a very interesting game. We got to see some of the strengths, but also some of the enormous limitations of a double O-Yoroi list. Massive strikes by both players up the flanks of the table. Turn 1, the O-Yoroi going this direction. Turn 2, the Evader Intruder, through the Evader Lupo Balboa team coming in this direction. Just some absolute haymakers that took out significant assets on both sides, using the edges of the table to make those maneuvers. But ultimately, hey, do I have a verdict on JSA Oban and the O-Yoroi? Well, I think this game kind of tells the tale of the tape for me. In terms of concentrated assets and the things that the O-Yoroi did, I would rather just take Hatamoto Imperial Guard and play Shinden Butai. In terms of having centerpiece units that do really cool stuff, the Hatamoto are just easier to maneuver. We're playing with a pretty similar total number of orders. They would get the same kills with the same guns that we got in this particular game because the important face-to-face rolls all happened seizing on things that were exposed. And having done that, they are just so much more dangerous in melee and so much more cheaper. However, what JSA Oban have are things like the Tanko. One of the things that Shinden Butai is missing a little bit are those pieces that are cheap, like really cheap, and can really overperform. A Tanko Senbutai with a disco ball is 19, 18 points. And it has a huge number of potential opportunities to be valuable. One of the things, we have a local named Maddie, and he plays vanilla JSA, and he plays the Tanko like I played them in this game. You use their impetuous activations. You use the fact that they have natively good ballistic skill. You just fire off the shotguns, you fire off the disco balls, you get your value out of them, and sometimes they get into close combat. It was a Tanko that secured more kills and did nominally more work than either of the tags this game. And that's something that Oban has, which Shinden Butai and the medium and bottom end of its troop choices are fine, but they're all utility pieces. They're not do work pieces. You've got things like the Tanuki, which I really like, and Rushis, and a few elements, things like your Jimbo, etc., but there's nothing that's quite like a Tanko. And so while specifically the archetype of two big centerpiece models that are the heroes and will do all the work, I would rather play Shinden Butai, there are selling points in Oban in the more diversified portfolio. Kasotsu are one of the most effective line troop teams in the game, and they subsidize things like, well, yeah, double tag, but other stuff as well. And so my line for JSA Oban would be, yeah, absolutely maybe consider one O-Yoroi, probably not two, but take full advantage of that Oban bottom end and all of the effectiveness and ability to spread out and use the troop that is in the best position and which can perform so well as a result because of the board state that it's able to take advantage of. I think I probably lately prefer JSA Shinden Butai because I just love Mia Hatamoto Imperial Guard. But the Tanko were absolute performers this game, and I would absolutely revisit them and that style of list that's perhaps a little bit less top-heavy. So, that concludes this particular game. Very narrow win to JSA Oban, something like 4-3 my way with plenty of opportunities for it to swing, and a fun and interesting list to do while doing so. As a reminder, big thanks to channel supporter DParrot, who made the request for any JSA Oban, but in particular double O-Yoroi. If you would like to support the channel and the videos that I'm making, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. As always, click like, click subscribe, all of that YouTube stuff. We cover a variety of wargames, of which Infinity is the foremost, and that means that we will see you next week for more wargaming content. As always, hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.